At the risk of sounding alarmist, I am seeing a lot of red flags recently with this Winnipeg Jets team, and a loss to the LA Kings, even in overtime, really isn't helping that. Find out why on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day, every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platform and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, we are chatting about some recent issues with the Jets. Obviously, they just finished a game against the LA Kings. It was an overtime loss, and you might think, well, that probably isn't too bad. But if you actually watched this game, yeah, Winnipeg just hasn't been that great. And I think this game is a really good illustration of why the past few weeks or even months, I've really been pumping the brakes on my excitement. There have been some good wins, don't get me wrong, but I think, continually this team is starting to prove what I've said about them against playoff teams is that I'm not seeing consistent enough even strength play that I'm really excited about. We all know that the Jets' power play and goaltending can be just downright elite. Eric Comrie in tonight's game was brilliant. He gave the Jets every single chance he could to come out with a victory, and they still couldn't do it. I feel bad for Eric because, he really is trying his hardest, and I feel like, sure, he knows that he's going to be getting, the crap starts for the most part, but this was actually supposed to be a better start for the Jets. They are rested. They've got Dylan Sandberg back. Josh Morrissey wasn't missing a game, and he put up a 913, which is 13 points above league average on the whole. So the fact that the Jets still couldn't come away with a more impressive performance is just incredibly disappointing. And, I continue to have issues with how the Jets are not really addressing some of their key problems, but we'll get to that part later. Let's start off with this game, right? So LA, quite frankly, just suffocated the Jets. Winnipeg really had nothing going for about 40 minutes of the game. It wasn't even until the third period and probably maybe halfway through the third period that the Jets finally showed some life. And it was basically because Winnipeg finally started getting a power play or two. And the first power play was a fair enough call. The second one was very sketchy. And the Jets may not have given up a lot of offense prior to that point and, gave themselves enough of a chance to tie the game. But for the most part, you look at the shot clock and Winnipeg was barely at, 10, 12 shots. It's almost, 30, 40, 50 minutes through the game. I think at the end of the second period, they had 8 shots or 9 shots or something. Just really, really embarrassing, to be honest. You're on home ice. You're against a Kings team that is very good and defensively stingy, but that if you really have this team and you're really considering yourself a contender, you should be able to at least play even with. And that's just not what happened. LA sucked the life out of the game. The Jets really had no response, and they really didn't make any in-game changes or adjustments to try and counter any of what LA was doing, especially clogging space, winning battles in the corners, and just making life really miserable. The top line was not awful, but not very good. I mean, they just really weren't creating anything. The second line looked pretty lost. Ehlers, had some really awful giveaways. Nemesnikov just really couldn't do much of anything. Perfetti, I think, was probably the best of the three, winning some really good board battles and trying to force turnovers and stuff. But every time he does, it just goes nowhere because his line mates aren't really able to take advantage. And so essentially you've got 3 guys who are just out for a skate, and none of them are really on the same page. The third line was okay. Lowry did his thing. But, the only line that I think really impressed people was probably the fourth, and that's probably not what you want to see against the Kings. LA is a playoff caliber team. They play a strong defensive style, and Winnipeg just really didn't have an answer for it. And every time they play LA, it does tend to be a bit of a grind fest. And so I get it. The Kings are a legitimately good team. And I don't think that losing in isolation is what concerns me. It's a continuing trend, though, that the Jets are struggling to create 5v5 offense and are basically hinging entirely on either the goaltender to steal a game or the power play to come through with like 3 or 4 goals. And you just aren't going to get that in the postseason. Winnipeg is going to face better teams. They just are, Colorado we're seeing tomorrow, and that's the kind of squad that the Jets are likely to encounter in the first couple of rounds. And we all know that the Avs have our number. Like, even if the Jets win this game tomorrow, honestly, I don't really feel much better about it because the trend in history against this team and how the Jets have been playing recently really doesn't instill a lot of confidence. And a game like this against the Kings, where the Jets really had no answers until the last 10 to 15 minutes, just doesn't really make me feel great about it. My concerns about the top line struggling against better opponents continues to be a problem, and that's not going away. If you're looking for positives, Dylan Samberg in his first game back looked great. He did have some rust for the first 2 periods. You could see a couple of reads and missed passes and plays where I think, he was probably not on the same page with some of his line mates, but it happens, and I think he wasn't the only one who was struggling. I thought Coghlan, despite having pretty poor underlying numbers for the evening, I thought he was actually pretty decent. Part of his issue, I think, was that he was paired with Stanley, and that pairing, we all know that when it comes to playing alongside somebody, if you're playing alongside Stanley, you're probably going to have rougher numbers on the evening. Logan is unfortunately not good enough to really help out defensively. And so, where Coghlan might be able to help with, some good offensive puck movement and skating and passing, his partner wasn't really able to do much. And instead, more often than not, either took himself out of the play with a big hit that led to a scoring chance for the Kings or had some bad turnovers. So just not a good performance, right? But I thought Coghlan himself did pretty well. And I continue to think that he is good enough to actually start for the Jets. Would be nice if he didn't have to try and carry around a partner who's not struggling as badly as Logan is. But at this point, I'm yelling until I'm blue in the face, and things don't really change. So what good does it do me, right? And I think that's just kind of what this game, by and large, fills me with is apathy and frustration. And it's kind of building. It's been building for a while. And I think, you think about the trends and stuff and how this team has played recently, and the fact that they only really seem to beat up on bad teams for the most part. It's not making me feel great about the playoffs. And they've also lost to bad teams recently. They've lost to the Ducks. I know the Wings are on a bit of a hot streak, but that's a team that you probably should be beating. It's not good enough from Winnipeg. And I think the Jets probably know that. I'm sure that they're completely aware of the fact that their record recently is not ideal. And really since, a fantastically hot start, Winnipeg has not been much better than over 500, just a bit. I know that we sort of joked after that really crazy early stretch of the season that even if they went, 500 the rest of the season, they'd still get over 90 points. I don't think I actually wanted them to be around 500, right? They should be much better than this, and they're just not. And to me, it's starting to become a real question and an indictment of the coaching staff that only part of the coaching staff really seems to have their stuff figured out. The power play is great. The PK, when they do a power kill or whatever, is great. And that's partly also, a roster situation. So not everything lies on Chenoweth's shoulders. But I need to see more from Arneal. Scott is not really making me feel great about this team's ability to adapt and adjust. And, some of the decisions and lineup choices that they continue to go with, I just, for the life of me, I don't understand it. I really don't. Maybe somebody can explain it to me in a way that makes sense. But, if you're having a team struggle the way that the Jets are, almost every other NHL franchise makes adjustments. They're not afraid to switch up lines and stuff. And I don't think Arneal is entirely, at fault for some of the choices here. I'm sure that there are external forces and pressures that he's facing. But the fact is, Winnipeg is stubborn, and it is going to kill this team if they don't figure out how to break out of that. I want to chat about that in just a brief moment because it continues to be really an organizational problem. But before we dive into that, I did want to let you know about our friends and partners at FanDuel. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same game parlays, and so much more. For me, obviously, I'll be watching Ravens versus Steelers tomorrow. Going to be a good game. I know there's one of you who's a Steelers fan. There's also somebody listening who's a Ravens fan. Love y'all. Thank you for supporting the show. If you're a Steelers fan, we're enemies for a few hours tomorrow night. But, either way, I personally think, Baltimore should have the over here, probably by at least a touchdown. I know that that's never how the AFC North goes. And if you're, maybe having a bit of a cheeky bet, you're thinking the Steelers are going to come away with maybe a 3-point win. This might be a great opportunity to cash in, because we all know that Ravens in the playoffs at times have been a little bit iffy. But the only way that you can actually get in on the action is to join FanDuel.com right now and get started with $200 in bonus bets, win or lose, with your first $5 bet. That's only at FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Everydayers, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we are maybe venting a little bit. I think that's probably the best way to describe it. The Jets just now dropped, a 2-1 overtime loss. I forgot to even mention the overtime period where Scheifele and Connor tried to play hero and stood out there for almost the entire couple of minutes rather than getting off the ice like they should have, and instead watched as, LA came away with a win while Pionk was desperately trying to stop a 2-on-1. I completely forgot about that because of frustration with so many other aspects. But, actually talking about Scheifele and Connor kind of leads into our next big point about the Jets being really stubborn. Winnipeg is one of the very few NHL teams I can think of in the league that just refuses to shake things up. Every team out there seems to generally make changes when things aren't going well. Sometimes those changes aren't good, and you don't always want to make changes for the sake of making changes. But if you're the Jets and you've watched this team basically be a bit above 500 pace for the last couple of months, and you've seen that, since December-ish and that really bad road trip, Winnipeg really hasn't been able to recover, don't you think you'd want to try something new? I get if they want to have Connor and Scheifele together on the top line, but if the top line's only doing about 50-50 in chance creation, and while they are winning maybe the dangerous chances, they're still not actually controlling their shifts as much as you'd like. Maybe you want to try and change something with Velarde, right? Gabriel, I think, has been good, but it's not like that line has loads of speed. And you compare it against the top lines around the NHL, and they are towards the bottom of the pack. Yes, they can outscore their opponents, and that's great. But if you're actually looking at how they control the flow of play, that's been a bigger problem. It's a thing where it only really happens against weaker teams. When you're facing playoff caliber teams against top-end opponents, the top line struggles. Look at what they did against the LA Kings. It wasn't until the power play that they really got involved. And so for me, I don't understand, from that perspective, why not even the players are willing to embrace this change. And then you get to the coaching staff, and they just choose some really weird hills to die on. Ehlers and Perfetti and Nemesnikov together have been awful. Maybe the underlying numbers haven't been as bad in a lot of these games because the shot differential isn't terrible, but you can just watch them not create offense. Defensively, they've done okay, and they've generally kept the play further up the ice, but they're not creating offense at all. Every time anyone seems to have the puck, it just seems like no one else is on the same page. There's too many differing styles of play here, and the Nemesnikov is not a second-line center. And so, they did try putting Lowry up there briefly, but then they switched it back, and they keep switching it back every time to just having the same trio. And then you get to the third line, which really didn't see any changes at all for months, despite, the Lowry line not exactly handling the months prior to December particularly well, especially, towards the end of November and stuff. And yet, finally Appleton, goes out unfortunately with a longer-term injury. And this is the first time that in forever they really make a change. And then, I expect once Appleton comes back, they'll just go back to the same thing. And you look at the defense, Logan Stanley somehow continues to be in the lineup despite all evidence suggesting that he's not really helping you win games. I sit there and I kind of wonder why Winnipeg is so unwilling to embrace the sort of change that they're talking about. And when we go back to summer and we look at them talking about the analytics summit and how they want to be a forward-first organization and stuff, it just rings hollow. Winnipeg talked about all of this stuff. They talked a big game coming into the season. And once the shooting percentage starts to dip and Winnipeg starts not getting as many power plays and saves as they were at the start of the year, you start realizing why this team doesn't look like it's long for a deep playoff run. I still have some hope that they're going to sort it out at some point, but this coaching staff is going to have to show me more. Right now, I really don't have that much faith that Arniel is the guy to get it done. All the stuff that he said and all the game that he talked about in the offseason, I'm not seeing it reflected on the ice. If your takeaway from the analytics summit is that you still have your role players and you're still willing to live with what Stanley brings over trying to figure out if Handler can bring in more puck movement and stuff, or if your top lines and top six are fixed as is and you're sort of willing to live with that, then what's the point of even looking at the data? The data is going to tell you that things haven't been that great for a while, and it's a problem that stemmed through years of lackluster play, especially from the top line, but not just from them. There have been other groups on this team that have struggled, and yet the Jets just seemingly are content to just make the playoffs. Maybe Cheveldayoff has some big surprise at the trade deadline that shakes everything up. That's a little against his MO. Usually he'll go for more depth additions. Last year, he brought in Monahan and Toffoli, which I think was good. And, two players that I think during the regular season certainly showed up. Toffoli may have vanished in the playoffs, but I don't know that that was necessarily, as much him as it was being a very bad stylistic fit against a team like Colorado that's super fast. And so, I just don't really feel like the Jets make in-game adjustments that often. And even when they make line changes, they just immediately go back to the original lineups and configurations that they had before. And I don't understand why. If it's not working and if you're not winning that many games outside of just leaning on your power play and Hellebuck, why are you so unwilling to figure out if you've got something more by changing a few combinations? This is the ideal time to do it. You're not that good at 5v5. You are a mediocre team at even strength. You are relying on Hellebuck to win you most of your season's games. I say this every year now, and this is probably the one rant for the next couple of weeks because, I've said this many years with this team, and I've for the most part generally been numb to it. You just sort of get used to the same cycles, but I just feel like the Jets are not a team to take seriously once it gets to the playoffs. Not unless they change how they view things philosophically. And maybe Arniel is being handcuffed, and that's why he's coaching the way he is. Maybe he really doesn't have the freedom of movement. And if it's the case that that's true, then I don't really know what to say other than we're screwed and we're never getting out of this. But if he's willing to buck the trend and push for some kind of a change, that would be what I would need to really restore my faith in this team. I know that they're in first in the Central, and I know that they're near top of the league right now, but they've done this stuff before. They've been a good regular season team for years. And it's when they get to the playoffs that they suddenly get exposed for the team that they really are. It's not a surprise where, Hellebuck and power play can't always save you when you're facing a team like Colorado that plays the exact style that is poison to Winnipeg's roster construction. And so, I feel like I say this stuff every year. In some ways, we have it better than other fan bases. This team is a perennial playoff appearer. They've got some really good, bright young prospects that are coming through the pipelines. We've got some, incredible value ahead with Connor Hellebuck's contract. Scheifele is still playing really well. And so, you'd think, what is there to complain about? And I think for me, it's like, you're not making the most of this. This should be a great time to try and figure out how to make this team better. And instead, Winnipeg just sort of coasts along and thinks that this is going to be good enough once they get to the playoffs. And then when they lose in the first round or even early in the second round and barely win a couple of playoff games, everyone's going to say, oh, how could this happen? What could they have done differently? And it's like, well, maybe if you'd listened for the past several years about why this team struggles at 5v5, it wouldn't be a shocker. But I don't know. I'm not an NHL coach. There's lots of factors that sit on Arniel's shoulders that are above my pay grade and above his too. But I just, I sort of worry that Winnipeg, continues to be content with the way things are, and they're not actually interested in change. And it's a shame because I think, Winnipeg as an org, with all the new cultural nights and stuff, and with a lot of the marketing promos and the more concerted effort to try and fill seats, I think everything off the ice, they've really tried to make a better push towards. There are still things that they're working on, but it has gotten much better elsewhere. The on ice product is still kind of mid, though. And it's crazy to say that about a team that has like 28 wins already. But when you look at how they've won some of these games, you start to realize that there's only a couple of like contributing parts that are actually carrying them to this record. And, Hellebuck on his celebration night was out. Comrie was in for this game. And you saw what this team was without without Hellebuck and without like tons of power plays. And it's underwhelming. I don't know what else to say, man. This team is what it is. I can probably tell you until I'm blue in the face that the Jets have to change. But, it is what it is. They're probably not going to change. Maybe a trade shakes things up. I can only hope that they have some interest in doing that. And, the team that they're about to face tomorrow is exactly the kind of opponent that I just know is going to be a serious problem for Winnipeg in the playoffs. We'll chat about their opponent in Colorado in just a brief moment. Before we dive into that, though, did want to let you know about our friends and partners at Gametime. I love going to live events, whether it's sports, music, comedy, even theater. And, one of my favorite memories this past year was going to a Knock Loose show in DC where, just waves of people, so much energy and excitement. Some people getting hurt, that probably wasn't as great, but you could just feel the throng of energy surging over you. And you probably want to go to some Jets games just like that. If you want to, you should make Gametime one of your first choices. They've made it even easier to get tickets for your favorite events with their new feature called Gametime Picks. This feature filters out all the fluff to show you only incredible deals on the hottest seats. And if you're wondering why you should pick Gametime in particular, they also show you your views from your seats, right? So I used Gametime last year for a Ravens playoff ticket. I could see where I was sitting. They push the best deal towards the top of the list, especially considering, price per section and all that. And it was a fantastic deal. I got to go to the AFC Championship game. I had a great view. And you know what? They showed you all of the fees and everything with all-in pricing up front. So if you want to take the guesswork out of buying tickets, go with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. Hey friends, welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we are just chatting about some real frustrations and stuff ahead of a game against the Colorado Avalanche, a big four-point game, and with the Avs suddenly in pretty good form the last couple of months, they are really bearing down and breathing down Winnipeg's neck for one of the upper seeds in the division. I know that they're technically in a wild card spot right now, but they've got 53 points tied with Dallas. The Stars technically do have a couple of games in hand, and so that's going to have an impact, but if the Avs continue their recent form, which they're 8-1-1 in their last 10 games, they're easily going to move into the upper half of the division, right? Minnesota's really falling behind. The Stars are on a bit of a hot streak, so that's probably the team that could keep them out of the second place seed, but top three in the division most surely. And quite frankly, I think the Avs might be the best team in the Central. The way that they play is really, the kryptonite for so many opponents. It's all high-octane offense built around the first line. And right now they've got Drouin, McKinnon, and Rantanen together. Sure, Landeskog may be an improvement on Drouin for sure, but it doesn't really matter when Rantanen and McKinnon just rip you to shreds, right? The whole problem of playing this Colorado team is that if you can't figure out a way to win the matchups when McKinnon is off the ice, you're never going to beat them. Colorado is one of those teams where Nate plays 22 minutes a night, and you spend a lot of energy trying to slow him down. You're not going to. Really, it's only if he gets injured or if he just has a random off night. Otherwise, you're probably going to lose that matchup. And so it's really important that you win your bottom nine matchups, because otherwise, you're going to find yourself in a real hole. And the problem for Winnipeg is that every time that they faced Colorado, it's one of these situations where the McKinnon line kind of slaps around the Jets top line and beats up on our depth. And by the time that our depth lines try to get things rolling, Colorado's overall team speed, even if it doesn't have elite skill on every single line, is enough to keep the puck moving quickly, to stretch the defensive structures, and to essentially pull Winnipeg apart. Eventually, the Jets just run out of gas. They can't keep up, and they get caught making mistakes. I say all of this, and it's going to be really funny if Winnipeg somehow hangs up like 3 or 4 goals and maybe shuts them out. But I get the sense that Colorado is just going to have a better performance against Winnipeg, and it's probably why they put Hellebuck in tomorrow, thinking that this is going to be the harder of the two opponents. Newsflash, didn't exactly go well against the Kings, so maybe that wasn't the best calculation. But the second line for Colorado is Colton, Parson, and Lehkonen. Lehkonen is scary. He's been scoring a lot recently. Colton, very underrated, very good winger, somebody who's been aggressively attacking space around the net. And, Parsonen, one of their more recent acquisitions from the Preds. Not exactly like Middlestat level, but a pretty decent center. Speaking of Middlestat, he's on the third line with O'Connor and Kiviranta. Middlestat is very underappreciated, very good center, and O'Connor has been, fast and very direct, and apparently just sort of drives towards the net and creates goal-scoring opportunities that way. Your fourth line is probably where the Jets stand the best chance of coming away with something. They've got Fellhaber, Kelly, and Inala on the fourth, and, technically the Jets could probably win a matchup like that, but if you're not going to be able to slow down the McKinnon line, none of this really matters, right? And so, that's the central thing. How do you manage around that? And with the way that the Jets are currently constructed, I just don't see it happening. I'm not sure if they're going to make a lineup change tomorrow. Maybe they bring out Stanley and put in Heinola or something. I doubt it. They would probably just have Stanley and Heinola together instead, which is not going to be any better. So what's the point of even caring at that rate? On defense, the Avs are pretty mobile. You've got Taves and Makar, which is an unbelievably good top pairing. Manson and Hahn, which has been pretty underrated and pretty skilled. And then Middleton and Malinsky, not exactly a great third pairing, but, so long as the top two pairings do their job, probably won't have to worry about it too much. And this is all without guys like Girard, Landeskog, Nichushkin, and, of course, Wedgwood, who's still out. I would expect either there's probably going to be Blackwood in net. Miner is the backup, and he I think lost his first start against Chicago, so they'll probably want to go with the more veteran experience, especially against the Jets. But I just don't have great feelings about this game. I know Winnipeg may come out and come away with a big victory, but even if the Jets do, like I said earlier this episode, I just don't know if that gives me a lot of confidence. I need to see them do it against Vegas and Colorado more than once or twice a season. And so far, they've lost I think they've actually lost all of these games against the Avs and Knights. They've only played a handful, so it's not a huge sample size, but we know that the sample size goes back many seasons. Vegas owns us. Colorado has generally had our number, barring a few exceptions. And so you just kind of know how this is going to go. It's frustrating. I wish I didn't have to be so pessimistic, but maybe it's better to just call it realism, because that's kind of where I'm at with this team. Winnipeg is really not doing enough to win my confidence right now, and there's still plenty of time to turn it around and really reverse fortunes, but unless the Jets show that they truly understand why they're struggling against these teams, I just can't see it. So curious to know what you're thinking. I've got Colorado probably winning this 5-2 or 4-2. That's just kind of how I feel. Maybe it's not going to be as bad. Maybe the Jets even come away with a big win. Wouldn't that be a nice surprise? But give me your score predictions in the comments below or at my social medias at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's show, though, that is going to be all the time that we have. I thank you so much for listening. As I was out sick on Wednesday, we'll have an episode probably tomorrow evening or Sunday recapping the game against the Avs. And yeah, I'm not setting high expectations, so we'll just have to play it by ear. But thanks for listening. Have a great night. And as always, go Jets, go.